evolution and rebirth now continues here on the History Channel.
In 1910, Porfirio Diaz sought an unheard-of sixth term as Mexico's president. But the regime was weakening, undermined by peasant unrest, labor troubles, and the dissatisfaction in the middle class. For the first time in nearly 30 years, Diaz faced a formidable challenger, Francisco Madero. The liberal cotton planter from Coahuila was hailed by crowds as the apostle of democracy.
Madero was an individual who had, I think, a great social conscience. And I think this was an enormous source of his appeal. He was concerned about workers on his own holdings, and as an administrator was concerned about things like the health of his workers. He was a kind man and concerned about social problems, but definitely a member of the elite.
When 30,000 Madero supporters demonstrated outside the National Palace, Diaz arrested not only Madero, but 5,000 demonstrators. Diaz then declared an election landslide, claiming that Madero had received only 197 votes.
197 votes is no indication of the real vote that he might have gotten in that election. It was an indication to everyone of how fraudulent this regime had become, because now it depended upon voter fraud in order to stay in power.
Once freed from prison, Madero crossed into Texas and issued a powerful challenge to Diaz.
A tyranny oppresses us in such a manner that it has become intolerable. This violent and illegal system can no longer exist. I declared the last election illegal, and fellow citizens, I call upon you to take up arms and overthrow the government of General Diaz. Francisco Madero.
After 3 decades of oppression, a Mexican leader was finally willing to seriously challenge Porfirio Diaz.
I'm sure that Madero realized what the risks were for challenging Porfirio Diaz, but he was willing to take them because the rewards were so enormous. In Mexican politics, if you don't take risks, you don't go very far, especially back in the days of Porfirio Diaz. He was willing to take that risk.
In the northern province of Chihuahua, hundreds of miles north of Mexico City, a notorious bandit named Pancho Villa heard Madero's call for revolution and raised an army of vaqueros, outlaws, and miners to join the revolt. Pancho Villa had grown up poor and hated the wealthy landowners that ruled the country. Uneducated and orphaned at an early age, Villa began his outlaw life as a young boy when he killed the owner of a hacienda who had violated his sister. Villa spent his teen years as a fugitive leader of a gang of bandits roaming the deserts and mountains of northern Mexico.
Pancho Villa is both myth and reality. We don't know when he was born. People think around 1878 in the modern province of Durango, Mexico. And his whole life is shrouded in mystery and drama.
We know that he carried a record of criminality into the revolution, that he was unable to maintain tight control over his own troops, that Villista troops killed foreigners indiscriminately on a number of occasions, that they were xenophobic, not having much use for United States citizens, for Spaniards, or for Chinese. And Villa himself, although he also talked about the need for agrarian reform and the breakup of the haciendas, when he was in a position to do something about it, and when he did break up a few haciendas in northern Mexico, he distributed the land not to the citizenry at large, but to his own troops.
Far to the south, a 31-year-old Indian horse trader, Emiliano Zapata, raised an army of indigenous peasants who had been driven off their lands by the hacendados. Zapata's idealism was rooted in the land which he believed had been stolen from the poor. Zapata wanted to break up the huge haciendas and give the land back to the Indian farmers.
He was a man of integrity. He was a man of focus. Even his enemies, the large landowners who were opposed to him, never successfully brought his integrity into question. He did not have a broad vision for Mexico, but he was very focused. What he wanted was to end the contraction of village lands in his home state of Morelos. He wanted the lands of the villagers that had been taken away returned to them. And because what was happening in Morelos was a microcosm of what was happening in the remainder of Mexico, his message resonated throughout the entire country.
With a fury, Zapata's peasants went on a rampage, burning the haciendas, killing the landowners, and taking back ancestral lands with guns and machetes.
We don't like what the rich men pay us. It is not enough to eat and dress ourselves. I want for everyone to have his piece of land so that he can plant and harvest. Emiliano Zapata.
The revolutionaries looked more like cowboys, farmers and bandits than an army.
Some wore overalls, others the charro jackets of peons. Few had shoes, most only had cowhide sandals. The rest were barefoot, rifles slung at their saddles, 4 or 5 cartridge belts crossed over their chests. This was their uniform. John Reed.
With Villa and Zapata's armies closing in, thousands of rebels filled the plaza in Mexico City, calling for the resignation of Porfirio Diaz. The federal army opened fire, killing 200 people in the plaza, but the crowd still refused to disperse. In the end, Porfirio Diaz, after 30 years of one-man rule, fled the country declaring, "Madero has unleashed the tiger. Now let us see if he can control it."
Madero represented political change in the country. He represented a new opening, and most of all, he represented new participation for people who had been left out of the political system for so long, especially a new generation of Mexicans, people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s who had never participated in national affairs. Now, this was their opportunity to participate by supporting Madero.
In June 1910, Francisco Madero entered Mexico City in triumph, astride a grand white horse. But the revolution was not over. The rebel Indian leader Emiliano Zapata pleaded with Madero to allow his peasants in the south to keep the land they had won with their own blood. But Madero, a landowner himself, refused. Zapata was outraged and considered Madero a traitor to the poor.
We declare Francisco Madero unfit to realize the promises of the revolution. He is a traitor to the principles which enabled him to climb to power. Emiliano Zapata.